With the 15th pick and with the 26th pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Washington Redskins select Dwayne Haskins, Montez Sweat.
Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sisters. I am your man and resident Redskins fan, Luke. Thank you for joining me here on the Redskins Report. Bat like cook crack. Back in my studios, back home in VA. Feels good to be back. And we got a lot to get to, man. A lot of nonsense and tomfoolery is going on. The biggest thing to take away from all of today's events, or the last 48 hours, outside of Bruce Allen being fired, obviously, is the biggest takeaway and the thing that we celebrated yesterday. But the official hiring of Ron Rivera, it's done. It's a 5-year deal now. All of the particulars haven't been released, but we were waiting for at least a time frame. You know, yesterday, everyone just assumed that this deal was done. It was a done deal and that all Rivera had to do was put ink to paper and it was a done deal. But then we didn't hear anything. You know, we had people telling us 3 hours from now, Rivera will be the next head coach of the Washington Redskins. He and Rivera and his wife had gotten on a plane and they were going to Washington and that this thing was done. And then we didn't hear anything. It went dark, essentially. But there was a lot of other news that came out, you know, and yesterday, Alex Santos was supposed to be fired. Then all of a sudden, Alex Santos wasn't fired. And for those of you not familiar with who Alex Santos is, he's the Redskins pro personnel scout. He's the head of pro personnel. So that was something that, you know, we talked about front office shakeups and things that could happen. And so I was shocked because I felt like Alex Santos was a valued member of this organization. Eric Schaefer was another guy that I felt like wasn't going to go anywhere. Kyle Smith was another guy that we've talked about a ton as potentially being promoted from within to general manager of this football team. So I thought those were 3 guys that I just thought had done a really admirable job in the face of a lot of adversity in this organization with all the turmoil flying around. I thought those guys would remain in the organization. But then again, you never know. We don't really know what's going on behind closed doors. We don't know who's a part of the problem, who's going to be a part of the solution moving forward. So I was shocked to hear that Alex Santos had been relieved of his duties. And then come to find out, he hadn't been. And he was still with the organization. So that happened yesterday. Then today, we find out that Eric Schaefer was released of his duties. And he's a guy that's a senior VP in the organization. And we all know Eric Schaefer more so for anything else with him handling contracts. I always like to talk about Eric making the numbers dance. I always talk about, look, I don't worry about the Redskins having cap issues because Eric always makes the numbers dance. You run the numbers by Eric. He figures out a way to make it so that the Redskins will be fine under the cap, and you keep it moving. So Eric's always given us the comfort of knowing, hey, look, man, whatever contractual situations are going on, Eric will make the numbers dance, make them work, and we'll be fine. But outside of that, I really don't know what else he does within the organization. He's been a trusted confidant of Daniel Snyder for quite some time. He's been in the organization for as long as I can remember. So I didn't think he was going anywhere. And then it comes out, Doc Walker had a report earlier in the day that, yeah, Eric Schaefer's out. And I don't know who told him that or if that was Eric Schaefer. And there are a lot of people saying that Schaefer himself told everyone that he was done and he was out. And so, you know, Doc Walker ran with that. And then it turns out Eric Schaefer is not gone. And Pro Football Talk had the same thing, saying that he was out. And then now we hear reports of Schaefer still being in. So JP Finley was talking about, you know, maybe Daniel Snyder's trying to sniff out a rat or whatever. I don't know what is going on in Redskins Park. Just know that the situation is fluid. And I tell you guys this all the time, that when things are just coming out, when stories are just floating around and everything is young, fresh, and new, these are the types of things that can happen. You get misreports because everybody wants to be first. Everyone wants to be the one to break a story. And so you just run with the information. And a lot of these guys check sources. I mean, they check 2 and 3 sources. And if they get the same thing from multiple people, or if they get it from the horse's mouth, in the case of Eric Schaefer, a lot of people keep saying he was the one that told them that he was out in Washington and now he's back in, or he was never out to begin with, whatever the case may be. I told you, these things change all the time. I just find it very funny because everyone wants to be first. Nothing has been substantiated. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing I'm going to focus on right now is Ron Rivera and his staff. We'll figure out the front office dominoes down the road because it's too convoluted right now. It's amazing to see how things have transformed over the last 48 hours with this guy being out. No, this guy's really still in. This guy's out. No, this guy's really still in. I'm just going to allow that to kind of breathe a bit, take a step back away from that, and just focus on the things that we do know, which is Ron Rivera is going to be the next head coach of the Washington Redskins. He signed a 5-year deal, which means, and I talked about this yesterday on the video that we did talking about Ron Rivera potentially being the Redskins' next head coach, about is it a 4-year deal or is it a 5-year deal? Here's the difference in league circles between a 4-year and a 5-year. A 4-year deal means, hey, I'm a little skeptical. I'm going to give you this job, but I'm not quite sure that you're going to get it done. So I'm not going to give you that extra year because if I have to fire you, I don't want to have to pay you for that extra year. A 5-year deal says, I'm fully confident in your abilities. I expect you to get the job done. You're not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. That's what a 5-year deal says. I'm going to give you an opportunity to turn this thing around, especially if you're a downtrodden franchise like ours. All right. The guy that gets the 5-year deal, that shows a vote of confidence. The guy that gets a 4-year deal, I'm a little skeptical. Maybe you're a first-time head coach, or I'm not sure, you're a retread. I want to see how this goes, but I'm going to give you an opportunity, but I'm not quite sure. He's getting a 5-year deal, and I think he's going to get a lot of say-so in this matter as well. And you know what's crazy? That this entire offseason, and I'm guilty of it, guilty as charged. I'm not going to run away from the fact that I talked about this being an unappealing job, that we're going to find it tough to find a guy that wants to come here that has multiple opportunities. Ron Rivera had opportunities elsewhere. He could have interviewed probably in Dallas, in New York with the Giants, also with the Browns. I think he could have interviewed for any of these vacancies and would have seriously been in consideration for every single one of them. And instead, he chose here. Why, you ask? I think that a lot of it had to do with the point man. And you see the picture that I was able to pull off of Twitter from an account. And I'm going to give you the account right now. The account is at JTGII1981. I'll make sure I give credit where credit is due. And I don't know where he got the picture from, but that's where I saw the picture for the first time. And someone sent it to me on Twitter, and I appreciate that. And that was at Johnny So Saucy. So I appreciate that. Again, I told you I'm always combing Twitter for a lot of different things because I can't see everything and I don't see everything. But you guys always do a great job of sending things to me. And so I always comb through everything that I can, read as much as I can so I can get as much information and bring it back to you guys. So I think Joe Gibbs was the point man on this. And a lot of people don't understand. And I've talked about this. I talked about this 2-3 months ago, that Daniel Snyder is very comfortable with Joe Gibbs and he confides in Joe Gibbs. And he's one of the guys that has never left Daniel Snyder's side. We talk about how toxic Daniel Snyder has been throughout his tenure as Redskins owner, but the one guy that has always vouched for him, the one guy that has remained in his corner, has never ever said one thing bad about Daniel Snyder, is our beloved Joe Jackson Gibbs. And so Joe Gibbs, I think, continues to consult Daniel Snyder, and I think he was the point man on this, as you see in the photo, of getting Ron Rivera here. And remember, where is Joe Gibbs living right now? Charlotte. Because his racing car company is based out of Charlotte. Where did Ron Rivera coach for the last 9 years? In Charlotte with the Carolina Panthers. I think he is very aware of what Ron Rivera has done for that organization and what he's capable of. And I think he was the one that told Daniel Snyder, this is a guy that you really need to go after aggressively and see if you can get him here. And I think Joe helped with that wooing process of getting Ron Rivera here, because again, there were other options out there. And I don't know how much control Rivera would have gotten in, say, a place like Dallas where Jerry Jones has his hands all over that operation. But I can tell you this much. Rivera has already said he didn't want control of personnel. He just wants to have say-so on who is active on game days. He wants to also be in lockstep with whomever the general manager is. And he wants to be able to have open dialogue with that general manager. If they disagree, they need to be able to come together on some common ground and be able to figure out what's going on and be together on decisions that are made regarding the roster moving forward. So, and he said, as long as I have access to the owner and be able to talk to him about something that I may not agree with the GM, and we all come together and figure it out, I'm cool with that. And so I think he's going to have a say-so in who becomes the general manager. And so there's a lot of moving parts here as we start to figure out more of the story in Washington since the hire of Rivera. But I do want to backtrack a second, because yesterday, remember, I talked about the statement that Daniel Snyder made, and I couldn't find it. And I kept saying, man, it's a statement that he issued. It sounds good, all right, but I couldn't find it. Well, here it is. I found the statement, and I want to read it to you guys quickly, and then we'll continue moving forward, talking about Ron Rivera and really this Redskins coaching vacancy that has now been filled by Rivera, and now start talking about this staff potentially that he's looking to fill out. So Snyder wrote as he fired Bruce Allen. He says, as this season concludes, Bruce Allen has been relieved of his duties as president of the Washington Redskins and is no longer with the organization. Like our passionate fan base, I recognize we have not lived up to the high standards set by great Redskins teams, coaches, and players who have come before us. As we reevaluate our team leadership, culture, and process for winning football games, I am excited for the opportunities that lie ahead to renew our singular focus and purpose of bringing championship football back to Washington, D.C. Look, that's a step in the right direction, that he somewhat took blame. All right. He didn't say I, he said we. However, he's a part of that we. So that's a step in the right direction, but it's just words. As I mentioned yesterday, I need action. Now, going out and getting a guy like Ron Rivera sounds good, but we've been here before. Remember, we've hired a guy that has been to a Super Bowl. Hell, we've even hired guys that have won a Super Bowl. Joe Jackson Gibbs, part 2. Mike Shanahan won multiple Super Bowls. So did Joe Jackson Gibbs. Both of those guys failed in Washington. We've been here before. Remember, when Shanahan was hired, we were just coming off the heels of getting rid of Vinny. So it's a similar situation. You bring in a coach with pedigree and winning championships, or at least being to a Super Bowl in the case of Rivera. We feel like change is coming, and we feel like it's a breath of fresh air. And then, things go awry. I'm trying to be cautiously optimistic this time. You get rid of Bruce. Let's see if they bring in a football guy from the outside. I more likely think that it's going to be someone from the inside. I don't see them bringing anybody from the outside in. But we'll see. Rivera, I think, may have a little bit to say about what the Redskins do with the front office in terms of the GM. But we'll see. I think they still want to keep the front office relatively intact. But we'll see what happens. Again, I'm going to leave that alone because nobody seems to have a real handle on what's going on in the front office. One guy's fired, then he's not. The next guy's fired, and then he's not. So I'm going to leave that aspect alone right now. But I do want to talk about Rivera. And let's talk about this job first before we get to Rivera in particular. Because remember, we talked about, and I'm guilty as charged, this organization being one that will find it hard to find a head coach. Well, Rivera would have had options. Look at the Browns. They've got guys turning down interviews. Matt Rule, the coach at Baylor, turned down the Cleveland Browns interview. And so, look, someone's going to take that job. All right. But I'm just surprised that the Redskins were able to get a guy like Rivera. And I really think that Joe Gibbs had a lot in the hiring, a lot to do in the hiring of Ron Rivera. I just feel like his influence still reigns supreme over this organization. And when Joe speaks, people listen. And you see the picture. I think Joe had a lot to do with getting Ron Rivera to come here, be comfortable in taking this job and knowing that he's going to have a fair shot at turning this thing around. And we'll see what happens. But when you look at Rivera, remember, we talked about him filling out his staff, and we just jumped to conclusions. Look, we were connecting dots. I was guilty. J.P. Finley was guilty. There were a lot. Look, anybody that had a brain started connecting dots. Like, hey, anybody that took this job that was a defensive-minded coach was probably going to be told from the jump, hey, we really think that Kevin O'Connell's a bright offensive mind. He started to gain a little bit of traction with Dwayne. There's a little bit of a continuity there. We don't want to break that up. So if you're going to come on board, you're going to have to take Kevin O'Connell as your offensive coordinator. I think that's something that was embedded in taking this job. I could be wrong because I think Ron Rivera thinks very highly of Norv Turner. And Norv, I don't think there's any way Norv Turner comes back to Washington. For those of you not in the know, Norv Turner was the coach here in Washington from, I believe, 1994 all the way to 2000. So, and it did not end well for Norv Turner. I thought he got a raw deal at the very end of his tenure here. And I think Norv still has sour grapes about the way he was terminated. And it was done by Daniel Snyder. It was one of the first things Snyder did when he got here was fire Norv Turner. And so I just don't see him coming back here under any circumstance. But that being said, I think Ron Rivera was told, look, we want Kevin O'Connell here as your offensive coordinator. You can do whatever you want with the rest of your staff. And we just assumed, Steve Wilks was Cleveland's defensive coordinator this past year. He was with Ron Rivera for multiple years in Carolina. He got the head coaching job in Arizona. It didn't work. He ended up in Cleveland. And now he's going to come back to work for Ron Rivera in Washington because the whole staff has been cleaned out in Cleveland. We were wrong. Sounds like Steve Wilks isn't coming back. And now the rumor is out there that Ron Rivera is shooting for the stars. He wants Jack Del Rio as his defensive coordinator, which is huge news for us because Del Rio, you say what you want about him being a head coach, and I actually thought he had some really good years in Jacksonville and then had that one really good year in Oakland. So I think there's something to be said about him as a head coach. But you look at Del Rio's track record as a defensive coordinator, it's sparkling. And you remember what I told you guys. I said, look, I want one of these veteran, old head defensive coordinators that's been around the block, that's gotten it done at multiple stops. I told you guys, I want a Greg Williams, even though I know he wasn't going to come here as a defensive coordinator. I want a Wade Phillips type. All right, I want a Romeo Crennel type. I want one of those types of guys that knows defense, that will come in here and turn it around. Everywhere that Jack Del Rio has been, it's been from bad to better in a hurry. He's been 20th to 2nd in multiple places. He gets defense done wherever he goes. And so if we're able to land Jack Del Rio as our defensive coordinator, I'm just telling you right now, it's going to get better quickly because we have the talent to turn this thing around. And I think he's going to start utilizing some of the guys that we've seen dropping into coverage and stupid shit like that. You're going to start to see guys like Montez Sweat getting after the quarterback and not dropping 7 yards into a hook zone, all right? And running down the field 15 yards with a running back out of the backfield. That shit is going to cease. And those guys are going to start getting up the field and getting into the backfield. We're going to start seeing Matt Ioannidis and Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen be one-gap penetrators instead of two-gap space eaters trying to get backers free. We're going to see a much more defensive-minded approach where guys aren't confused and trying to think about what they're supposed to be doing and just going out and playing. If we get Jack Del Rio, that changes things on the defensive side of the football. I have confidence that even if we don't, Ron Rivera is going to have this defense going in the right direction. But a hire like Jack Del Rio, and one thing Ron Rivera has done throughout his tenure as a head coach in Carolina was he allowed his coordinators to coach. He wasn't a micromanager. You're the defensive coordinator. Yeah, I may be overseeing things, but you're calling the defense. I'm going to move away and remove myself from that situation. Offensively, I'm going to allow my offensive guys to do what they do, and I'm just going to manage the entire team as a whole. And so that's what you want. You don't want a micromanaging coach. You want guys that delegate and allow everyone to do their jobs. Now, at the end of his run in Carolina, guys weren't getting the job. Eric Washington wasn't getting it done as the defensive coordinator because remember, every year his defensive coordinator was getting poached. Going back to Sean McDermott, and then it was Steve Wilks, And so he was down to his next guy in Eric Washington and didn't work with him. And so at the end of the day, he had to demote Eric Washington, and he had to take over the play calling duties at the very end. But for the most part, he's allowed his defensive coordinators to call the defense, his offensive coordinator to call the offense, and he's just managed the entire team. That's the way I prefer it. And so it's going to be interesting to see if he is able, in fact, to land Del Rio. Don't know if that's going to happen or not. It'll be interesting to see if, in fact, we keep KOC on as offensive coordinator. I think that's a foregone conclusion. But again, we've been wrong about a lot of things throughout this process. It's such a short period of time. So I'm not going to assume anything, but I think that's the more likely scenario, is that KOC is the offensive coordinator, and then we'll see who ends up being the defensive coordinator if, in fact, Jack Del Rio is back on the sidelines in that capacity. That would be awesome for our organization. And then you would be looking at one hell of a staff if you've got Kevin O'Connell, who we think is starting to blossom in his role as offensive coordinator, and then there won't be the handcuff of old man Callahan telling him what to do on first and second down. You'll start to really see Kevin O'Connell get comfortable and calling the game and seeing what he's really capable of on that side of the football. And then Jack Del Rio potentially spearheading what has been a lackluster unit defensively for the Redskins since Bruce Allen has taken over. Really, we haven't had a real defensive coordinator, as I mentioned, since Greg Williams. And I thought Greg Bloch didn't do that bad of a job after Williams was no longer here. But we haven't had a real defensive coordinator since Greg Williams. It's been a long time. We've went through the Jim Hazlitt's, the Joe Barrys, and the Greg Minuskis of the world. It's been bad. And to get a guy like Jack Del Rio could be really big for this organization. So we'll see how, Rivera decides to fill out his staff. Tomorrow is supposed to be the official press conference for him. I will definitely be tuning into that to see what he says about this job, this opportunity, what lured him here, what he's looking to do. And then we'll start kind of hearing him fill out his cabinet as far as his staff is concerned. And then I think we'll start to go from there. So really looking forward to seeing what actually happens with this whole situation. And then the front office dominoes will start to fall, and we'll see who's here, who's not when the dust settles and the smoke clears. But right now, that's a fluid situation, as we've already seen, with so many people being wrong and having to refute tweets that they've sent out and walk things back because they thought they knew something, then they were proven wrong. And so I'm, like I said, just going to leave the front office stuff alone for right now and kind of just focus on the things that we do know, which is Ron Rivera is getting a 5-year deal from the Washington Redskins to become their new head coach. And we think that the offensive coordinator is going to be KOC, and the defensive coordinator reportedly could be, we're not sure about this, nothing is certain right now, could be Jack Del Rio. That's who he potentially is after, and that is a huge fish out there swimming around in this humongous pond of defensive coaches that could be plucked this offseason. So really looking forward to that. Let's get to a few comments. I don't want to read too many. I don't want this video to go on for too long, but I do want to read a few comments. Let's see. Reese says, so what I've heard, the offensive staff is staying put. Is this true? We don't know anything. Obviously, it can't be totally intact because Bill Callahan was the offensive line coach. Now, obviously, he was promoted to interim head coach, but if you wanted to keep the staff intact the way it was, Callahan would go back to offensive line coach, and he's not going to do that, I wouldn't think. And so I really don't know what's going to happen. Ike Hilliard, I thought, had done a tremendous job with the wide receivers, but is he going to be back coaching the wide receivers, or is Callahan going to, or is Ron Rivera going to bring in his own guys? I don't know. It's really a fluid situation right now. Nobody knows anything. That's what I know right now, is that no one really actually has a firm handle on what's going on out at Redskins Park right now. Reese says Ron Rivera didn't want to deliberate. He wanted to find his team fast and get to work. And some of that did have a little bit to do with it, but he also probably wanted to find the right opportunity. If he felt like the Redskins job wasn't the right job, I'm pretty sure he would have been willing to wait extra 24 hours until other teams had vacancies. I think the Cowboys are ultimately going to get rid of Jason Garrett. They're taking a lot longer than I thought they would. They still haven't announced anything, but the Giants have gotten rid of Pat Shurmur. The Browns got rid of their head coach, Freddie Kitchens, immediately after the season. They didn't waste any time. They got rid of him on Sunday night after they had lost another game to wrap up the season. So, and now I'm hearing that the Browns may fire their GM, John Dorsey. So a lot of things could transpire over the next, 48 hours or so. And if he wanted to wait, he could have waited if this wasn't the right opportunity. But I think he felt like this was a good opportunity for him. Let's see. Syndico says, I hope he brings in great coordinators. Rivera is a great guy, but he's not the guy to innovate. You got a motivator, players coach, and a culture builder. We need all of those things. And that's why I think it's very important that he have great coordinators. And that's a great point that Syndico brings up. He's a Carolina Panthers fan. I talked to him when Rivera was first fired, and he was the one that told us all of the charges that were brought against Rivera that ultimately did him in Carolina. And I brought those up yesterday on the video. And that's part of the reason why I want a guy like Del Rio. That's part of the reason why KOC, I want him on the staff, because I don't want Ron Rivera having to do too much other than manage the team. Be a culture builder, be a guy that nurtures these players and gets them to want to run through a wall for him. That's what we need. We haven't had that here. We haven't had a guy that has been able to galvanize 53 men for one common goal and have everyone on one accord. We've had cliques and factions, and we've had people that believe in this coach but don't believe in that coach. And we need everybody on one page. And we think Ron Rivera is the guy to be able to do that. Reading all of these tweets, hearing from all these players, hearing Gerald McCoy say that this is the best thing that could happen to these players in Washington, having Ron Rivera become their head coach. That makes us as fans feel like we got the right guy and that this thing could turn around immediately. Now, I don't know how this is going to go. We don't know how much power Daniel Snyder is going to be willing to give up and how far of a step back he's going to take, if any. We don't know what's going to transpire. We've seen this movie before. Could this be a different ending? Maybe. Time changes people sometimes, but it's been 20 years of the same damn thing with Daniel Snyder. So unless he has learned from all of the people that have left in terms of fans, because there are a lot less of us than there were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, okay? And so I don't know if he's starting to realize that he has to look in the mirror and have some introspection, and he has to allow football people to do their job or not. But I can tell you this much. If Ron Rivera is what everyone is telling us he is, and he hires the right people around him, this could be a big, big change for this organization, and it can be big things for us in the future. We'll see what happens. But again, not really sure. Make sure you guys like the video. And make sure you subscribe to the Louis T Network if you haven't already done so. And if you would like to, donate to the Louis T Network via Super Chat, via PayPal or Cash App. All of that down in the description below. But anyway, going to read a couple more comments and then we'll get out of here. Syndico says, prepare yourself for some close, nail-biting games because he is quoted saying he prefers an old-fashioned 7-6 game, and when you feel you should be winning by 20, it will be tied. Well, some of that also has to do with the performance of your players on the field. Again, Rivera wasn't calling offensive plays. Now, he's a guy that he decides whether to go for it on fourth down, to kick a field goal. He's the guy that decides, do I go for it on fourth down? Do I punt the football here? And all of that is a feel. It's a feel. And I remember back in that 2015 season when you went 15-1, he was rolling the dice. And the Panthers were hot that season. And so I feel like if he trusts his offense, if he trusts his play caller, things could be different. I mean, he wasn't skittish in that 2015 season, and they paid off a lot of his bets. He rolled the dice a bunch, and his offense came up big for him a lot in 2015. So I feel like he's a guy that goes with the flow of the game, and if he feels like his team can make him right, he'll roll the dice. If he doesn't, he'll punt the football or he'll kick the field goal. I've seen him do some things in some situations that I didn't think he was going to do, and I was wrong and he was right. And anybody that's remember me talking about Rivera, I thought he was a terrible coach initially in Carolina. You know, after the first 2 seasons and they weren't getting it done, I was like, get rid of this guy. And then they go 12-4. You know, the third year with Cam Newton and Rivera. And after that, I was like, man, I was wrong about Rivera. And after that, he won me over. I was a Ron Rivera fan. You know, and to see him take this team, have them 15-1 in the Super Bowl, steamrolling teams that year, I thought a lot of that credit needed to go to Ron Rivera. He was outstanding that year. And hell, you know, even that year where the Panthers made the playoffs at, 7-8-1, I believe. I thought Rivera did a hell of a job that season. I mean, it wasn't an easy season, and it was a bad division, but he still found a way to get the team into the postseason. So we'll see what happens. Ravens fan says, how about Callahan as an offensive coordinator? Absolutely not. Let's see. You know what I do want to speak about? 2 things. One, I don't know if you guys heard that the Redskins also parted ways with Ron Hess, what is his name? Larry Hess, the head trainer for the Redskins. He's been with the organization for like 14, 15 years. Larry Hess has been the head of the training staff for as long as I can remember, and he's been a guy that has been very close to Daniel Snyder. That's another sign that Snyder is really trying to change the culture. And I tweeted this out yesterday. Could this be a sign that he's also trying to get Trent Williams back on board? I mean, you fire the 2 guys that Trent Williams had the biggest problems with, which was Bruce Allen and Larry Hess. And all of a sudden now, that window of Trent coming back, I don't know if Trent wants to come back or not, but they're laying the groundwork for him to have dialogue to potentially be back in Washington. I know that much. Now, Adrian Peterson on his exit interview said that he thinks Trent would come back. This is the same guy that told us Trent was going to come back before the season started, that he expected Trent to walk through the door any day. So I'm not going to put too much stock into what Adrian Peterson says. I will say this, though. Just connecting dots, as we generally often do here on this program. Not always right, but we do make sense and draw inferences from things that make sense. You get rid of the 2 guys that Trent Williams had the biggest issues with, and Bruce Allen and head trainer Larry Hess. And I'm just saying, maybe Trent Williams could remain a Washington Redskin. And obviously it's going to take a new contract. Do you want to give a new contract to a guy who hasn't played football in an entire year and is going to be 33 when the next season starts? I don't know. You know, I think he's still got some good football left in him. And you're not going to be looking to draft a tackle early in this draft, especially if we don't recoup that 2nd-round pick, because if you don't trade Trent Williams, most likely you're not going to get a 2nd-round pick for anybody else on the roster. And so you probably won't have a 2nd-round pick. Most likely you're not going to get a tackle in this draft. All right. So I'm just saying. And I don't know how much longer you're going to be able to get serviceable play out of a guy like Donald Penn. All right. At some point, Donald Penn may get old on you overnight. We've seen it happen with players in this league before. So I don't know what the Redskins are going to do at the left tackle position, but Trent Williams remains an option. I wouldn't be so fast to write him off as a guy that's immediately going to be traded this offseason. We'll see what happens and how that situation unfolds. He still may be ultimately traded before it's all said and done. He could be back in the Redskins uniform. And as much as 2 weeks ago, that seemed like a slim to none proposition. Now, all of a sudden, it could be a 50-50 proposition, him being back in a Redskins uniform. I don't know. Stay tuned to that. And something else you should stay tuned to, and I know a lot of Redskins fans do not want to hear this, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Josh Norman is back in play in DC. I know a lot of you are like, get him the hell out of here. Hear me out. Josh Norman's best football was played under Ron Rivera. And I remember a distinct quote from Ron Rivera before we played the Panthers last year. Not this past year, but last year when we beat the Panthers in DC with Alex Smith at quarterback. And they talked about some of the struggles of Josh Norman, and they asked Ron Rivera, you know, can Norman still play at a high level? And he can say, all he said was, if used correctly, Josh Norman can still play at a high level in this league. And I'm going to leave it at that. I think Ron Rivera felt like the Redskins were misusing Josh Norman this entire time. I told you guys before we even signed him, and I wanted him. I'm not going to sit here and backtrack and act as if I didn't think he was a good football player. I wanted Norman. And I said before we got him, though, that he's a cover 3 corner. Cover 2, cover 3, cover 4. That's it. All right. One side of the field. You play him aggressively at the line of scrimmage. You press and bail him. He's got eyes on quarterback. He makes plays on the football. That's Josh Norman. You start putting him in man-to-man, and you start having him travel as a star corner, and he's going to get his ass roasted because that's not who he is, and that's not what made him an all-pro corner in Carolina. Him playing in zone coverage made him who he is. He's Dick Sherman, essentially. All right, he's Dick Sherman. Dick Sherman doesn't travel across the formation. He doesn't play a ton of man-to-man. Dick Sherman plays in zone coverage, and he's damn good at it. Same could be said for Josh Norman. Now, look, Norman hasn't been good in man or zone, but I think he lost his confidence, and really, I think he lost his love for the game. All right, look, this organization was a mess. Greg Minuski was terrible. The communication on defense was horrendous. There are a lot of different extenuating circumstances as to why this defense was bad, and Norman was a part of the problem, not the solution. But I can tell you this much. With Ron Rivera coming on board, that's going to reinvigorate Josh Norman, because I think Norman was ready to retire. Either retire or find another team. And he had already said that if the Redskins had won a Super Bowl, he would be gone. He was done with football. So in my mind, I was thinking this guy's already got one foot out the door. With Rivera back in the mix, and now all of a sudden his head coach again, I think Josh Norman could be reinvigorated. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know if Rivera wants Norman back. He may watch the tape and say, this is not the guy that was in Carolina, 3 years ago. And he's a lot older now. Let's move on from Norman. He's got a big number. But I can tell you this. If they sit down at the table and Rivera says, look, you're going to have to redo your contract. You're going to have to take a lot less guaranteed money. It's going to have to be a lot more, incentive laden. You meet some of these, you get 5 interceptions this year. You get a bonus that kicks in for $2 million, that sort of thing. You make plays for this defense. You create 4 fumbles and you get 5 interceptions, and that's $5 million added to your salary then as a bonus. If he signs one of those incentive-laden deals and like, look, no guarantees here, all right? All we can guarantee you is, $1.5 million. You come to camp, you win a job, and we'll go from there. Who's to say what happens? Maybe Josh wants to stay in Washington. I don't know how it's going to go. I know a lot of you don't want to hear that, but I'm just telling you, Rivera's back in Norman's life as a coach. And we all heard the reports of him playing the Khalid song, Better, at his locker for the exit meeting. I'm just telling you, I'm just saying, you thought you had gotten rid of Josh Norman. He may be back for at least one more year. He may be back. He may not be back. I'm just saying, 2 weeks ago, hell, last week, it was 100% certainty that his ass was gone. Now with the hiring of Ron Rivera, just like Trent Williams, it's kind of a 50-50 proposition now. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Anyway, you know what? Let's get out of here because I'm getting too long-winded. What we'll end up doing is we'll come back either tomorrow or Thursday, and we'll go live. I'll open up the phone lines. We'll open up Twitter. We'll open up the YouTube chat, and we'll chop it up. I'll let you guys call in. I'm going to make sure that I don't allow callers to hijack the conversation and have 7-minute calls. I'll make sure I keep the calls to a minimum in terms of the time allotted. And so we'll do that at some point this week, whether it be tomorrow on New Year's Day or Thursday. We'll get this thing figured out, though. And I kind of want to let some more things transpire. Want to hear from Ron Rivera, obviously, tomorrow. Hear what he has to say. I'd like to hear some more definitive hires and promotions and things of that nature in the front office. But whatever the case may be, we will be live at some point this week. And we will definitely chop it up. But there's a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of fascinating things going on right now. And you know what? For a 3-13 season that was a train wreck and a disaster, these last 48 hours have been really refreshing as a Redskins fan. As I've continued to state, cautiously optimistic. Do not go in all the way if you're a Redskins fan. Again, I won't tell you what to do, but be careful, all right? We've been here before. I was excited when the Redskins hired Mike Shanahan. When Bruce Allen came on board, thought we had a real general manager, thought we had a real NFL head coach. He had all the power, did Shanahan. He brought in Kyle, a great offensive mind. All right, I thought he was going to turn this thing around. All right, brought in Jim Haslett, who I thought had good enough defensive chops to get it done. I was wrong. All right, so as I said before, be very, very careful. Okay, be very, very careful. Okay, I am a Redskins fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Redskins spirit will never die. Redskins spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to our beloved Washington Redskins. I thank you guys for joining me. We will definitely chop it up at some point this week, and I'll make sure that I alert you guys in advance so you can set your alarms. You can set your YouTube channels to tune in, all right, via Twitter and via YouTube. In the community post, you will know when I will be going live well in advance, whether it's tomorrow or it's on Thursday. Either way, I thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to Louis T Network if you haven't already done so, and also make sure that you continue to stay locked in to all the things that are going on, because we're going to talk about it, whether it be tomorrow or it be on Thursday. I'm your man, Louis T, signing off. Until next time, you guys take care. Have a good one.
Louis T Network.